It's again with enormous privilege that I can introduce the next speaker. As I said to you at the beginning of the day, today is a really special day for me. You know, it really is a privilege having all these amazing people here, and you're starting to get the picture, I think. But our next speaker is someone who has also really inspired the project and has really guided the project in so many ways. Uncle Bruce Pascoe is a Yuin, Bunurong and a Tasmanian writer, editor and anthologist. And I know for many people, including myself, I remember I was completely captivated when I saw him on TV with First Australians talking, and I have been a huge fan ever since. His words and his ideas have constantly kind of sort of sat very deeply within my imagination. And I just thought it was really helpful because I think this quote captures a lot of what Auntie Jules was just talking about, and also builds on a lot of the research and writings that Bruce has done. So when talking about Aboriginal history, Bruce said in that First Australians, which has always haunted me, he said 80,000 years, 100,000 years, it doesn't matter if it's 60,000 years, it's an incredible length of time. It's the longest civilization on Earth, and if you can't learn something from a people that successful, then you're defying your own intelligence. And that is something that has really always connected with me very deeply. Bruce has written a number of books, but the two books which have really, again, this is your reading list for the day. The two books that have really sort of helped guide this project is obviously Convincing Ground, Learning to Fall in Love with Your Country, that I enormously recommend everyone to read, and Dark Emu, Black Seed, Agriculture or Accident, which will be available from the bookshop as well, and I know Bruce is going to be staying late to do some signings for us. So it's with an enormous amount of privilege that I welcome Uncle Bruce to the stage. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge the land, this beautiful place, and the people from the land. That was a real privilege to hear that great story of country. You know, everyone here is privileged to hear that, to be in the room at the time when it was said by such a great storyteller. All my family are storytellers too, and I learnt my craft, storytelling, from them. Obviously they weren't as good as Julie's old man and grandmother, but they were pretty good. And I remember it was only last year, this time, it was 2 years ago, around September, I was involved in a cultural ceremony which I was incredibly grateful to be involved in, and I was seeing little girls who I'd known when they were born, now as 25-year-old women going through ceremony, and a woman was standing opposite me, and at a point in the ceremony she had tears in her eyes, and I thought, that's an interesting woman. I wonder who she is, because I didn't know who she was, and it was this lady here, Julie. So when we had afternoon tea, I thought, I'm going to sit next to her, and I sat with my shoulder to her, but so that I could see her, but not look at her, and hear her, but not look like I was listening, because I'm pretty deaf anyway, so that wasn't too hard to do. And I listened to a big long yarn, you know what kind of a storyteller she is. And then I heard her mention my family's name. And so there was a bond created there because this woman had knowledge about my family that I didn't have. And I've been hunted ever since that day. This young fella here, skinny bloke here, he's Dolamunmun, short skinny legs, not that short. But about 8 years ago, I think, in the art gallery. I didn't know him from a bar of soap. And I'm sitting there and he showed me something while we were listening to Julie Goff from Tasmania, who I met about a fortnight ago selling tickets for the ferry to Bruny Island. This is one of Australia's very good artists, and here the poor girl is selling tickets to the Bruny Island tourists. And I saw her there, I knew that I was going to be coming here, and I knew I was going to be telling this story because I can't help myself. And Jonathan told me a little tiny fact, just brought two ideas together. I didn't know who he was, and I just looked and I thought, the mind that can bring that idea and that idea together is really interesting and is worth paying attention to. So I've been aware of this fella, and after Dark Emu, this very good book that you're all going to buy later on, and I'll stay forever to sign them for you, $35. How do they do it for that price? But after I'd written that book about, what Australia doesn't know about Aboriginal people, Jonathan sent me an email. Hadn't heard from him, for all those years, and he sent me an email, and it was a big, long essay about Aboriginal stone tools. And I'll start talking real stuff in a minute, but what Jonathan was saying was that he went into the National Museum in Canberra and asked to see all their artefacts, and he started finding these stone tools that are this big, and he realised you can't lift them over your head, so they have to be worked like this. And they had handles on them, long handles, and they were used like a pendulum, like that, like a pick or a plough. You apply those two nouns to what you were taught in school about Aboriginal people, and it transforms your whole history, all you Australians. It transforms your history. Why weren't we taught that stuff? Because it's so interesting. Any teacher in history now who teaches a boring lesson to our children and our grandchildren needs a kick in the knee. And then if that doesn't work, a kick somewhere else, because, there's so much interesting stuff we learnt about this country. Forget the people, because as Julie said, we are nothing. It's the land. Find out about the land. And I'm going to try and tell you a little bit of a yarn about that land, and I'm going to try and drive someone else's computer, so watch out for the smoke, eh? Yeah? So if I can... Here we go. Oh, look at that. Now, it's been very interesting being here today. Do you mind if I wander around? I'll still yell. You'll be able to hear me. This is Mount Goongerah in Victoria. Goongerah, possum, or Goomera. Some other languages say Goomera of the neighbouring languages, but Goongerah is the possum. But this is part of the snake's journey. And that snake, David Claudie, when he found out where I came from, he started telling me a big story about the Australian Alps, and the rainbow serpent travelled through that country. And I said, "Oh, Uncle, you've been down to the Australian Alps." He said, "Never seen them, never been there. My grandfather told me that story." This is the persistence of story. He could draw the mountains. He could show me the valleys. He could show me where the snake went. He'd never been there. This is great memory of country in our DNA. And these are part of a series of the rainbow serpent snake eggs here. And I was listening to Clint this morning, and it was so fortuitous. I really dragged my feet coming up here this morning because, we were we've been very busy at home, and my wife is a lovely woman, very hard to leave. And so, you know, I was really dragging the feet. You know, I left at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then I hear Clint talking about whales, and I go, that's why I'm here. That's why I actually made my feet keep on dragging, because I'm going to hear something today. And I did, because this story about the snake, which goes right the way up where the white side of our family has a home at Lockhart River in North Queensland, that snake goes all the way down through Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, all the way over to Western Australia, and that beast's head is on Rottnest Island. And that binds all that country together. There are other stories of other snakes, because part of that snake's journey is also to the centre of Australia. And, you know, we share, all those people on that songline share totems together. So we understand each other. Even though this is our land, we understand a little bit about them and their land. But this whole story that binds all that land has a parallel story which binds all the sea, and that's the whale. Because the whale, this is the story I've heard, and other people have a different story. This is the one I was told as law. So I'm responsible for this story and to tell it this way. Other people have a different version, but it doesn't matter, because it's all about the earth and the ocean. We are nothing. The whale goes from Hervey Bay and follows all the way down past Tasmania, down the east coast, all the way up through the west coast of Tasmania, across to Warrnambool, all the way over to Albany in Western Australia. Once again, binding all that country together, our good old Gurrawal. And this brings all of those people together in story and song. And one of our ambitions, and I was telling young Clint this, is that I have just come back from Tasmania. We've got relatives in Tasmania as well. And I was over there to see relatives. But I also went to Bruny Island because I'd been told that on Bruny Island there is something special about the whale. And I was expecting a carving or something like that. So I went over to Bruny Island with that woman I was talking to you about. And we go to Bruny Island, and we're not really, we don't plan our trips meticulously, but we said when we go over there, we'll ask around about the whale. Someone's going to know, aren't they? Tasmania, the tourist state, they'll know. Anyway, I get to Bruny Island, I go to the information centre, there's something about the whale here, there's carvings of the whale. I said, yeah. And I brought out a little postcard with a whale in relief on it. I said, I don't think that's it. Anyway, I asked and I asked and I asked. I went into several hotels, not because I wanted to be here, but because I wanted to ask. No one could tell me that. I'm sitting in the little house where we were staying, looking across to a place romantically called Satellite Island, because it's a tiny island off the coast of Bruny Island. Satellite Island, terribly romantic name. I wonder who gave it that. And anyway, I rang up Rodney Dillon, Aboriginal man whose mother, old Auntie Enid, who's very ill now, told me about my Tasmanian family. A little tiny clue, like something I couldn't work out. And she goes, there were two ladies by that name, and I could never work out the dates of our relationship to those people, and there's two of them called the identical name, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Anyway, so I knew a little bit about Rodney, and he said, you are looking at where the whale burst through the rock to escape the shark. Now, I'd just come 6 weeks earlier from Barangouba, or Montague Island, off the coast of Bermagui. And there are the two figures, the stone figures of the shark and the whale. And I was there with my son. So I was able to say to him, look, have a look. And he, being a boy of 31 and university graduate, he goes, yeah, I know, Dad, yeah, I know. I said, have a look, have a look. He said, like Uncle Max told me, I know all that. I said, no, have a look. That is the whale. That is the whale. Where were you when you were 6 months yet to be born? Where were you? He said, oh, right. Because the story is that when my wife was pregnant with this boy, Jack, we were standing in a cave because it was raining, cats and dogs, and we were hiding from this rain. And we knew this bay intimately. And suddenly there's a rock there, and I'm going, I dive there, I'm looking for crayfish. I go, I can't remember that rock. And I'm watching it, and all of a sudden, up it comes. The whale. Just rose straight up in front of us from here to the wall. Like it was we're standing on a cave on a rock, and that drops away to 20 foot straight away. There's the whale. Up like that. And I said, that's who you are, smarty pants. That's who you are. Don't tell me you know. And that is his connection to that animal. And I was able to show him that on Montague Island. And I could have died then. I could have died because I'd done what I had to do. Anyway, I'm talking about stuff that I didn't intend to talk about. It's her fault. When I wrote Dark Emu, I wrote it out of fury. I'm a storyteller, not an historian. People talk about me as an historian and an academic. I'm disgusted by both terms. I went to university accidentally, and left even more accidentally. But really, I'm a storyteller. I ended up writing histories because I couldn't find a history book that satisfied me about my country. And that's the only reason. This is my country. This is Australia. People started sending me stories or bits of information about people harvesting seed in Australia. And there was an American called Norman Tyndale, because no Australian archaeologists at the time had any interest in Aboriginal people. Or if they did, they wanted to steal their bones, like at Lake Mungo. So I was interested in what Tyndale had said because, and here we go, we're going to do the red dot. Oh, it's a green dot. It's go. And here's our current Australian wheat belt. There now. This is where Tyndale found that explorers and settlers had found Aboriginal people harvesting grain. All the other area in here was yam and tubers of some kind. This little map was a revelation to me, and it's beautifully drawn. You can see how artistically this dotted line has been done. I did it. Looks like I did it on the tram. But anyway, this made me start to wonder about what I didn't know about my people, because the circumstances of my family meant I had to find out everything. There was virtually nothing that anyone in my family could tell me about it, because the family, for one reason or another, all of them very good reasons, nothing I can condemn, but chose not to remember their race. Or they remembered, they just didn't tell anyone else. Sad. So, after Dark Emu was written, they're very attractive hands. After Dark Emu was written, some old people, the old girls up at Lake Mungo, and their grandchildren and their children, invited me up there to help them grind this grain, panicum decompositum, which Sir Thomas Mitchell and Charles Sturt, both very good writers, and the better explorers in Australian history, they'd observed people harvesting this grass. Mitchell saw 9 miles of stooped grain. That's a pretty big harvest. That's a bit of huge dedication to the land, a huge dedication of labour to do that. And I'd never heard of this. So those kids wanted to bring back a bit of their culture, those lovely Barkindji kids, those muddy, Lachi, beautiful people, lovely kids. They live in country that I don't understand. I'm saltwater through and through. So I can last there for 3 days and then I've got to smell salt. Otherwise, I go all weak at the knees and I beg to be taken home. So everywhere I go, I'm looking for salt. But these people were so enthusiastic about their culture that we ground up this flour, and the person who was guiding them through this, the archaeologist who was guiding them through this, couldn't speak English because he was Japanese, not Australian, not English, Japanese. The first person to take interest in this grain, apart from Aboriginal people, was Japanese. My blood boils. Why doesn't our country show interest in this fascinating stuff, this story of country, the grain itself, the story? Anyway, this Japanese fella got the kids to make solar ovens. Oh, geez, the wrong button, Brucey boy. And there's the bread. This is a solar reflector. This is the sand of Lake Mungo, this sacred sand. There's the bread. Now, it's not 100% decomposite flour. It's about 40%, and with some white flour and another grain, the grain of pigweed, which they call pigweed. And you could smell that bread from 300 metres away. It smells, the grain itself smells like this and the bread smells like this. It's aromatic. Julie talked about the perfume of grass on the hillsides. It smells like a very hot February night when you walk out through grass and you can smell the grass itself. That's what it smells like. It is a commercial product, and Australia has done nothing about it. Why, with all the money-hungry mongrels in this country, has 2,000 cooking shows looking for product, why hasn't anyone done anything about this? Because it has Aboriginal provenance, and it reminds people of the war. Now, we lost that war fairly convincingly, but people don't want to be reminded of this war. And this stuff, this bread of our country, reminds people of it. And 34,000 years ago, at least, probably 60 or 70,000 years, an Aboriginal woman near Cuddy Springs ground grain into flour, looked at it, thought, I'm going to mix that up with some water, looked at it again and said, I'm going to put this in the fire. And she invented bread. The next person in the world to do that after her were the Egyptians 17,000 years ago. Australians invented bread 15,000 years before anyone on earth. It's not a thing you want to tell the French about because you're going to get into trouble. But Australians invented bread. We shouldn't be walking around the world boasting about Vegemite, Foster's and the stump jump plough. I'm sure none of you talk about the stump jump plough when you go overseas. I'll send you straight back. Or to Nauru. There's plenty of room over there now. I've distracted myself now because I'm reading the newspaper. But this is a really important world product, and it was invented here by our people. And one of the other things of importance that Aboriginal people ate, one of the many staples, but this is an important one, is the yam daisy. Now, Bill Gammage wrote that book about Aboriginal use of fire and all that sort of stuff. One of his mates sent him a photo of this painting. Bill sent it to me, because this is 1841 Kangatong near Healesville in Victoria, very early on. This is supposed to be the first mob of cattle coming into that country. And they've already grazed it down here, but look what they've grazed. This is all Murnong. That yellow flower is Murnong. This is Aboriginal cultivation here. And this painting is a witness to it. Eugene von Gerard. You know, I was told Europeans when they came to Australia didn't know how to paint the country, but they were pretty accurate and they recorded historical detail. This is the Murnong. This is part of my crop 2 years ago. This is the old mother plant, Gurramun, the old mother plant here. And these are this season's new tubers, or it was 2013 or 14. This is bushrat, because a bushrat will walk past strawberries to eat that. That's how good it is. 10 times as nutritious as a potato. And the bushrats are giving me curry at the moment, I can tell you, because it's been so dry down there that they're starting to invade our gardens, causing a bit of trouble. This is my son. He's probably got the biggest plantation of yam daisy in the country at the moment. And, you know, he's a 6'3", blue-eyed, pale-skinned lad. And here he is, look, this is, for him, this is his culture. He didn't have to do that, but he did. This is a very sad photograph. This is the Brewarrina fish traps. No one knows much about those fish traps. All of Australia's academics, you know, how many academics have we had in Australia over the years? And about the Brewarrina fish traps, we have one book, and it's 60 pages long. It is the cover is black and white reversed out. It is saddle stitched. That's staples. That's the only book on these fish traps. And some say they're the oldest human construction on Earth. Imagine what an American could do that in tourism. But once again, we cannot afford to pay attention to this if we want to hang on to our myth, the Australian myth of possession. In Victoria at the moment, there's a big debate about was Australia settled or invaded? What a waste of time. Of course it was invaded. Get over it. Get over it, you invaders. Learn to live with your history. We have. You know, it's obvious that the place was invaded. And this is so important, this photograph, because this fish no longer exists. Because the Brewarrina fish traps were based in the old Aboriginal way of looking after your brothers and sisters in states. Well, they weren't states then, obviously, but along a song line you didn't even know who they were. They spoke a different language to you. You would never see them. But these traps allowed fish to pass so those people could eat. That's the law. And this fish here needed to breed well upstream. So when the dams were built across the river, it died that season. And it's very, very sad that you know, science is so short-sighted. Science is supposed to be empirical. You know, if you're going to build a dam across a river, think about what else it could do. Our people built a house with a stick and a piece of bark, and they all lived under that stick and a piece of bark. That's what I was taught on King Island. I was taught that at Mornington. I was taught that at Fawkner. And I was taught that at Melbourne University, the best university in the land. So the people at Melbourne University say. That's what I was taught at Melbourne University as a history student. And I was only taught that incidentally because I wasn't going too well at university, and I said, I want to study Australian history because I couldn't bear to say Aboriginal because they would have kicked me out straight away. I said, I want to learn Australian history. And they say, look, we don't teach Australian history at Melbourne University, because nothing happened. Nothing happened over 100,000 years. This, we are running away from an incredible culture in this country. And I was told that, my people lived either out in the open or under a bit of bark and a bit of stick. This is from a Lockhart River. My great-great-grandfather, white man, probably helped conceive black children in something like that. I was told Aboriginal people were barely human, were thought to be subhuman. And there are many websites in the country at the moment who still say that. But one of the European definitions of civilization, of growing food, making clothes, and living in houses, and domesticating plants, all of which we did, was reverence for the dead. These are the pottery masks, the caps, the widow's caps Aboriginal women would wear, and then after the period of mourning would place in the cemetery area, and they're up here as well. This is a dedication of labour and love to the memory of someone who's very special. Here has an eye for beauty, has an eye for art, and look how clear it is in this area. A lot of work has gone into remembering that person. This was someone's grandmother here, probably. Some really revered person, but an indication of civilization. This is down in the Western Victoria. We visited this after the 2008 fires down there at Tirrandara, and this was exposed. And about another 100 of these were exposed after those fires. I was travelling with a little woman called Margie Cooper. She sat down in there and burst into tears. She said, "My grandmother was born in here. Not that particular one, but my grandmother was born in here." And she just collapsed. Poor thing. But, this is a stone building. It would have had a domed thatch. The first settlers who came to this area were invited into a stone house. When they got in there and adjusted to the light, they found there were 52 other people there with them. Imagine the size of that building. Bit of bark and a stick. Earlier this year, I was at the Latrobe Library in Melbourne. Sorry to advertise another library. But I've always wanted to see the original Sturt's Journal. I'd read it, and because I live remotely at Mallacoota, often I do stuff online when it works. And so I'd never actually seen the real book. And I was amazed to find that these illustrations were in there, and here it is again. Different part of the country, but this same, attention to beautiful detail and the reverence, the serenity of that place. Just amazing. And here are the houses. Now these are quite small houses, but still got the dome roof. And these are bigger ones again. And this one over here is like a sliced dome. But have a look at the size of the people, have a look at the size of the building. That's a very substantial dwelling. Oh. Look at that.
You charge me 50.
Look. Incredible. Now, just one last thing. I don't know how I'm going for time, brother. Just about there, eh? Yep. I was at the Eel Festival at Lake Bolac recently, and something that Julian Clitt said earlier today resonated with me, because about birds returning, and someone at lunchtime mentioned corellas, and how birds and country can't be separated from each other. And I was there with a young man called Jamie Thomas, who used to be the flyweight amateur champion of Australia. His name then was Jamie Commons, but he changed his name back to Thomas, which is his Aboriginal family name, because he'd found out his dad had been belting up his mother all through the time when he was young. Anyway, this young man has gone back to his culture in a big way, searching for his culture, trying to repair himself, because there was a lot of damage in that young man. There still is, but he's a great cultural warrior. And he said to me, "You've got to come down there. We're doing a ceremony for kids. We're trying to, we're not going to initiate these kids, but we're going to initiate these kids into a better way of life, because they're all in trouble. One way or another, they're all in trouble." So he said, "I want to show you something first before we go to these kids." So he took me at the back of Warrnambool, and he said, "Look over there." And there were 3 birds. They were magpie geese. They were the first 3 magpie geese to return to Warrnambool. They had been at Tower Hill, but that only complicates the story. Let's just say first birds in Warrnambool, magpie geese. They used to be all through Victoria. They used to sell them in the Footscray market as food to such a degree, and the draining of swamps as well, that the bird was virtually eradicated. The magpie goose comes back, and Jamie, being the culture man, he goes, "What we're going to do with these is, look here, he shows me a page. He says, this is magpie goose dreaming on the chests of these men. So we're going to paint up these lads as magpie geese for the first time in 200 years. So we do all the painting up. We had Major Sumner there from Adelaide at the time, and he's another culture man, so we're all talking about how do we do this, how do we do that, what colour here, what colour there, because it was a black and white drawing. And we're painting up these kids. Now, some of these lads, they've been on a diet of potato chips and McDonald's and slushies, and so they're big lads, big unfit lads. And so, magpie goose, you do the wing and you do the breast. So we're running our hands with clay over unfit bodies. And while I'm doing it, I'm super conscious of those young lads' feelings. How do they feel about this, doing this? And I glanced up at one young lad, and I could see him going like this. 6 inches taller than last time I looked at him. He's like this. Paint me. Didn't say nothing. Paint me. All righto. So we paint up, and all those lads, from the intuition of a culture man, Jamie Thomas, taking us back to the birds, things, that we still are. He got those lads dressed up as the magpie goose right back to their great-great-grandfather's time. And it took us way back. What Jamie was doing was calling up the goose. Calling the goose back. Calling the goose back. We love you, goose. We love you. Come back to our land. And those bad boys, they were part of it. And they'll never forget it. I certainly won't. I've got to mention Genevieve O'Callaghan down here, because we've been talking culture stuff about an essay that's going to be in that catalogue. And, I'll tell you the truth, I've been I was a bit worried about this old garden palace thing, building, and, it had all our artefacts in it and stuff like that, but it didn't have us in it. At that time, it didn't have us in it. But and I was saying this in my essay, and Genevieve said, hey, have a look at this. And she showed me a page out of the catalogue which talked about Positum and Panicum Lavenode, you know, two of the grass. And I said, oh, they didn't have any of our stuff, because the thing I'd read about the palace said that all the produce in it was from Queensland. I was wrong. Genevieve was right. But the interesting thing about it was that under Panicum decompositum, Lavenode, they say Thomas Mitchell observed Aboriginal people eating bread from this flour. So all those years ago, those people in 1881 or whenever it was, they were super conscious of what Mitchell and Sturt had done, what they'd observed. It was us that forgot it. They knew that Aboriginal people were eating bread, but it's us that forgot it. Well, why did we forget it? How did we forget it? Who was to blame? Doesn't matter. Too late. It's what we do now that always counts. So anyway, I'm grateful to Genevieve for her persistence, her cultural persistence in telling an arrogant man when to get off the tram. Because I thought I knew everything. My father always said I did, and so thank you very much.
Well, that was obviously and really insightful discussion, which I think really opens up a lot of the avenues for challenging how we see landscape and how we think about this country. I was wondering if anyone had any questions that they'd like to ask Bruce. I have one. I've got hundreds of questions, as you know. Probably too inquisitive for my own good. I've been asked a few times with this project, why is an Aboriginal telling a colonial story? And I want to know how you would answer that.
Well, I would answer it differently today than I would have 4 days ago. It's part of our story. You know, it's built on our land. The fact that it burnt down is curious indeed. Nothing much worries me about what has happened. What worries me is about what's going to happen. And we can get all, you know, our Prime Minister talks about people getting misty-eyed, usually about other people getting hurt. Don't get misty-eyed about other people getting hurt. We shouldn't get misty-eyed about the past, and we shouldn't hear stories like this and get misty-eyed if we're not going to do something about it, if we're not going to change. You know, there's a big debate in the Aboriginal community about whether we want sovereignty, recognition in the Constitution, land rights, or any of these things. Now, land rights has probably been the most destructive thing for family, Aboriginal family, that could ever have happened. Cousin fighting cousin, brother fighting sister, mother fighting daughter over land rights. Now, the legal mind is incredibly acute. You could not design anything more destructive of the health of Aboriginal family than the Land Rights Act. But some people have followed land rights through and they've got their land back, so who am I to complain? But we have to have this discussion about them, but they have to be of Aboriginal origin. The Land Rights Act is not an Aboriginal act. If we're going to have sovereignty, it has to be of Aboriginal origin. If we're going to have recognition in the Constitution, it has to come from Aboriginal people. We can't settle for something that just takes us, 2 centimetres away from fauna and flora. Recognition as fauna and flora. It has to be something significant, otherwise we've missed the boat. So it's not, it's very hard to keep a dry eye listening to Julia Freeman talk about the land. Very hard. But don't let the tears get the better of you, because it's what we do. about this emotion, what we do about this emotion that is going to make a country of us. Because too late for America. You know, what has happened to the First Nation people over there is catastrophic. It's not here. It's not catastrophic here yet. And we, as a nation, you know, all the colours, all the countries of origin, we are on this place. And we can do something about fixing this place, because it's not fixed yet. And we can look after the land. What a wonderful journey we would have together if what we concentrated on was not each other. That was a very wise thing to say. We are nothing. It is the land. It is the land that makes us, and we are in the land. You know, all the bits of sand on the ground are made up of our ancestors' bones. You know, we are of the land. So if we don't look after the land, we can't look after everything. But if we truly begin to look after the land, and it's not about planting 100 trees, it's about looking at the land and saying, what do you need, Mother? What do you need? And it's obvious what she needs. She needs to be loved and not insulted. What we do to the land is just a direct insult, a direct cultural and sexual insult to the land.
Oh, there's a question, Edwina.
Sorry, I keep asking questions. I'm just as bad as you are, Jonathan. Look, it's a really interesting question, isn't it, about when we're talking as a nation about innovation. And Julie and yourself are talking about the importance of stories, and we know that for Aboriginal people, it is about the talking of things through before you make a decision that's really critical to the process. So how do we as Australians link those stories to the big stories? We're at the moment a one-dimensional conversation as a nation about STEM. But, as Julie says, well, we invented all of this stuff and, at the end of the day, science is just catching up. How do we link those things together? Because we are at a point in our history where culture seen as is becoming more marginalised. Culture itself is becoming a bit of a fringe dweller in Australia. So I just think we were activating these discussions about language, but it's a really important question to ask at this point in our history as Australia.
Well, I'd go straight back to the land and once ask the land about itself and where we fit in. Because someone mentioned today the rock art around Sydney is the biggest art gallery in the world. A lot can be learnt, from that art. There are, relationships between people and the universe in some of those paintings around this city. And it would do us well to study those paintings and learn from them. And not just learn from them as an academic or as an learn about them, because this is an understanding of people who are here for 70,000 years. They've linked the sky with the land. They know this country, and it would be wise to pay attention to that detail.
I guess I'm struck at the parallel between Jonathan's work and your own, Bruce, because to my thinking, Bruce, you've used the words of the early white explorers to essentially draw a readership into the story and then to find out a lot more about how Aboriginal people lived, rather than going the other way, finding archaeological evidence or evidence in the language. And similarly, for Jonathan, he's got this spectacular that no one ever knew about, and that draws you into the story of all of the Aboriginal artefacts that were lost and the story of dispossession. So, sorry, it was more of a comment than a question, but please expand.
Yeah, well, I think my excuse was that after Convincing Ground, writing Convincing Ground about the war between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, the invaders, $44. But embossed. After I finished reading Convincing Ground, I started talking to mainly Aboriginal people about some of the things in there. They were feeding me little bits of information about what they knew and what they wanted to add to that story, what they wanted to add to Convincing Ground. Some of it was to do with food and what they ate when they were kids and what they were told their mothers and fathers ate. And so I started writing essays about this. Essays, I'm a storyteller and I'm writing bloomin' essays. I was disgusted with myself. But I had to, because to explain that we were missing the point in Australian history. And I have to be delicate here. The publisher said that I wasn't allowed to put the word Aborigine and agriculture in the same sentence because it didn't happen, Bruce. I was being wrapped over the knuckles by these Canberra academics. It didn't happen, Bruce. Well, I'm a belligerent sort of a fellow. And I took that to heart and I said, righto, we'll see about that. I went to the first second-hand bookshop I could find and I picked up a copy of Sir Thomas Mitchell's Journey into Tropical Australia, Volume 1. And it cost me about $5, best $5 I've ever spent. And page 96, I read there that Mitchell rode through 9 miles of stooked grain. Now, I'm a reader. My grandmothers, my mum and dad always knew what to get me for a present. I was mad keen on it. Don't bother about batting gloves, I'll bat without them, but get me a book. Get me a book. And so they would pick up a series. There used to be a Seagull Collins Seagull library, and they bought every one of them. There's about 30 of them in there over a period of time. And so I'm a bookish sort of a person. We lived in remote places. A lot of the time I was on my own. So I knew how to access books. That was my trade. That was the kind of a payoff that I got for being in the family I was in. So I knew what the word stook was. I knew it meant like a hayrick, a collection of hay by human beings. And I thought, this isn't the Australia that I was taught about. I didn't know that those are probably Gamilaroi people worked their hearts out to create these stooks of grain so they could make flour to make bread for their children. So on page 96, I go, righto, what's next? It's Charles Sturt's diary. In the very centre of Australia, he comes over a sand dune, he's dying, he's got sandy blight, can't see, he's just about dead. The horses are so weary they can only walk in a straight line, and he's hailed by 400 Aboriginal people, race up to him with water, and then they feed him roast duck and cake. I mentioned that in Dark Emu because it's so ironic, roast duck and cake in Sturt's stony desert, where he was dying. And these people are living a bountiful life. This is the lie all about the dead heart of Australia. It's not the dead heart, they were just growing different plants. Growing plants that only need one watering, no fertiliser, but they did need Aboriginal people to harvest them because all the seed matured at the same time because that plant had been used to that habit over thousands and thousands of years. It had become a domesticate. And Australia refuses to grow that plant to this day. Not because it's no good. They could argue that its yield per acre is not comparable to wheat. Quite true, but it doesn't have gluten, it doesn't need all that water, and it doesn't need fertiliser. This is a very highly commercial plant But we refuse to look at it because we don't want to look in that rear vision mirror at what happened in 1842 in Victoria and 1778 in this town. Because if we say that plant, that Aboriginal grass plant, is very interesting, we then have to accept the history and why we Australians allowed sheep to mow it down. It just takes us back to the history. Now, we're not going to change that history. I don't want to change it. Have a look at the colour of my skin. You change that history, I disappear. I don't want to disappear. I love my life, this country, and I love my family's history, all of it, whole bloody lot of it. And I said, well, I don't want to change anything, but I do want to change the future. And we can change it. You know, it's a dynamic thing. It's not set in stone. We can change it. So, you know, I urge you all to be optimistic. I've got 3 grandchildren. I cannot say to those kids, because of climate change, they're going to go to hell in a handbasket, because of what has happened to white institutions in this country, that they'll never get a fair go because they're Aboriginal, even if they have got red hair and blue eyes. I can't say that to them. I have to say to my grandkids, it's all good. You can do this. You can do this. Go to school. Finish school. You'll be able to do this because the world is good. And it is, and it's full of bloody good people, from my experience. Uncle.
To me, that's they all go hand in hand, and we can't have one without the other. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it has to all go together like that, because what's happening with all the, you know, we've got chefs now interested in our food, you know, but they only want the food. They don't want the culture that goes with the food. They don't want the language that goes with the food. They might want one word to be able to put on their menu and to brag on television, but they don't want the whole culture. They certainly don't want the whole history. And so I'm saying to people, don't eat our food if you can't swallow our history. So, yeah, pretty deadly, eh? Boy from King Island thought that up on his own, more or less, except it was, you know, on bits of my grandmother. See, my grandmother, most intelligent woman I've ever met. She was a beauty.
Scientist of all science.
No one smarter or wiser than my grandmother. Never went to school. Poor thing. She would have been wonderful, you know, as an academic, as a philosopher. You know, philosopher is a better word than academic. She was a philosopher all her life. But, you know, we can't, this is what Aboriginal law is all about, Yunk, is that it's not one thing here and one thing there. They're all bound together. So the language is part of the land. The language comes out of the land, and it has to be tied into culture. And, you know, I'm very lucky to have been involved in Aboriginal culture, because I could have easily missed the boat. And I'm very grateful to a number of people that I didn't miss the boat, because now I feel part of the culture, but I also feel part of the land. And I get an opportunity every day at dawn to welcome the sun, to welcome grandfather back to our... And it means, for an Aboriginal person, when I was a lot younger and a lot angrier, can you believe this man was angry? Yeah, probably. I used to say that every time an Aboriginal person, it is a political act, because that's the way it seemed to me. It seemed to me that every time I woke up, I had to prepare myself to defend my own people, to defend the history of Aboriginal people, to defend myself as an Aboriginal man, this colour. And you know, it just seemed like every day was a grind of defending Aboriginal culture. But now, it's not like that at all. It's like It's just the sun shines, and that's all I need to know. And my mother tried to tell me that when I was 9, and of course I didn't listen well enough. But she was dead right. She said, "You know why you're sitting down there at the beach staring out at the water?" She said, "Because you're thinking of country." That good old woman said to me.
Well, I think you've definitely, given generations of blackfellas something to celebrate. It's not, we have something to fight for, and we have something to go to, for that grind. And it's an amazing gift. And as I said before, I can't thank you enough for all your amazing words and wisdom and thoughts that have really guided a whole range of, and I'm sure not just me, and it'll continue to guide people. So thanks so much.